Hey everybody, Kris White with the American Battlefield Trust, and I'm here at the USS Cairo Museum in Vicksburg National Military Park, and we're so happy that you're with us. Please share this with your friends and your family. Click that subscribe button, that bell notification, and go over to battlefields.org to learn more about what the American Battlefield Trust is all about and what we do, including educating people about the Vicksburg campaign and American history in general. But for the Vicksburg campaign, we have a fantastic animated battle map. We have an app that you can download on your phone for free. We have all kinds of articles, videos, anything you could think of. Again, over at battlefields.org. Check out our YouTube channel, Instagram, as well as Facebook. And I'm so delighted to be here at the USS Cairo. This is a city-class gunboat that is sitting back here behind me. It was one of 7 that was created for just over $101,000, and this one was actually sank during the Vicksburg campaign. So to talk a little bit about the Cairo, and joining us is one of my favorite historians, the Tim Smith of the West, as he's known around the American Battlefield Trust campus. Tim Smith. Tim, thanks for being here. Can you tell us about the Cairo?
Yeah, absolutely amazing story. Sunk in the Yazoo River, just north of the national park here, in December of 1862. Not raised until early 1960s. So it spent 100 years in the bottom of the Yazoo River and was raised, the famous Ed Bars, of course, and the effort there. So really interesting and fascinating, unique exhibit here. Not every national park has a Civil War ironclad that you can actually go on board, you know. But the sinking is what's really fascinating. It's part of the whole early Vicksburg campaign. Chickasaw Bayou, the Navy's trying to clear out mines in the Yazoo River, getting ready for Sherman's arrival and what would ultimately become the Chickasaw Bayou operation in December of 1862. And on December the 12th, Commander Selfridge, Thomas O. Selfridge, takes the Cairo and several other gunboats up the Yazoo River, and they actually kid around and say Commander Selfridge is supposed to be removing mines from the Yazoo River, and he did so by placing his vessel on top of 2 of them. And he removed the mines all right, but it sank the vessel in 12 minutes. Fortunately, there was no loss of life. There were some wounded and some injured and so on from the explosions, but it sank in 12 minutes and remained there for the next 100 years. What is really fascinating, if you look right here, you can see where the mines hit. They called them torpedoes then, but you can see the gaping hole in the port bow of the Cairo, and you can tell exactly where they hit and the damage that it did and why it sank in 12 minutes. So really unique exhibit here.
Awesome, Tim. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're at the USS Cairo Museum here in Vicksburg, Mississippi, so I'm going to head on board. Tim, I don't know if he's going to hang around with us. He's shooting some other things with us, so I want to thank him if he's not hanging around. Otherwise, we've got a really B-list historian to come on named Kris Mackowski, and you know, we're going to the bottom of the barrel to bring that guy on.
Just let me tell you, a real B-lister.
Man,
I'm going to be Tim Smith's stunt double.
Well, as we go on board, let me just tell you about the city class gunboats. This is one of 7 that were created. They were built designed by a man named James Eads. Eads had 100 days to build his gunboats, and any day after that 100 day, he had to pay $200 a day to the federal government for not being done with his contract. So what he does is he simply puts together boats that are paddle wheelers. We are on the Mississippi River, and we're going to be in what's called the Brown Water Navy. The United States Navy during the American Civil War has really 2 different style navies. The Blue Water Navy, which is the deep waters. You would think of the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico. But to get into the inlands of America and into those backwaters of like the Ohio, the Mississippi, the Cumberland River, the Tennessee River, the Red River, you need smaller vessels. And you need vessels that are more maneuverable and have a lighter, shallower draft. So we create these many different types of gunboats. And this is the city-class ironclads that they will design. We'll have timberclads, cottonclads that have cotton on the side of them. We'll have all kinds of different vessels coming up and down here. Basically, if it would float, the U.S. government bought it from you and slapped a cannon on it. The U.S. Navy in 1861 had 90 ships on record. About half of those were seaworthy. and some of those weren't even in U.S. waters. By the end of the American Civil War, there's more than 600 United States naval vessels going up and down the rivers and the oceans around here. So as we get on board the Cairo, the story of it is pretty interesting. The City class Ironclad is supposed to go up the Yazoo River, as Tim pointed out. Its sister ship, the USS Pittsburgh, my hometown, will be going along with it, and they're going with a flotilla. The idea is, as Tim pointed out, is that they needed to clear out the waterway. These mines that were out there were actually encased in glass. They would have a gunpowder charge inside of it. They would have a fuse system that was dipped in wax, and then there was a cable, copper wire, running to the shoreline. And these would be anchored down, and then if the ship got close to it, you would throw the plunger down and detonate the mine, in theory. Probably the most famous other naval mine sinking of a U.S. vessel will take place during the Battle of Mobile Bay in August of 1864, which sunk the ironclad USS Tecumseh. But the Cairo, in December of 1862, is sunk on the Yazoo. Now, Selfridge is Tim pointed out, the commander of the ship, is actually not in the lead. He and the Pittsburgh are actually towards the back of the flotilla because they are the big gun boat. They have 13 guns on this vessel. We'll have 2 up on the bow, 2 in the stern, and then the rest will be on either the starboard or the port sides of the ship. And these guns actually have the ability to open up their gun ports, and we'll show you that in a second, so they can elevate their guns a little bit higher to hit things on the shoreline. Remember, Vicksburg sits up on bluffs, and when you're in the Mississippi, you might be lower or higher depending on where you go. So Selfridge is actually hearing the mine clearing operations going on ahead, rifle fire and other fire, and those are U.S. sharpshooters, or probably just infantrymen on these boats, picking off the mines, shooting them in the river. Well, Selfridge, without even figuring out what's going on, calls for general quarters and charges ahead. And as he charges ahead, as Tim pointed out, he put his boat right into the minefield, and 2 of them were detonated. One of them was detonated right over here, and you can see the hole that we pointed out from the other side. Here's the port hole. This is going to hit right off the bow, just below the front gun deck here. They had 3 guns in front. And as they go and it explodes, they'll start taking on water here. Another will hit on the starboard side, amidship. Midship means right in the center of the ship. And that will fill this ship with water, and in 12 minutes, it sinks. It is a great Confederate victory, and this isn't the only ship sunk during the Vicksburg campaign on the north side or the south side. The CSS Arkansas, a Confederate ironclad ram, is sunk in the Mississippi after 23 days. It was like the Bismarck of the Mississippi. Every Union ship is trying to take this thing out. Eventually it's cornered and it's sunk and burned by the Confederates themselves, so it's not captured. The USS Indianola goes down, the USS Cincinnati, the USS Cairo. A lot of ships will go down. But as we walk over this way, you actually can take a look back towards the power plant of this ship. We're going to have our power plant. These are the fire boxes that we have down below us, and this will also create the steam that we need because this is a steam ship. You can see the wood kind of coming up here in a U pattern. That would go up to the smokestacks or the chimneys. Atop the chimneys, you'll see a gray band. You can't see it from where we're standing, but that's going to denote to the fleet that this is the USS Cairo. Each one of the City-class ships had a different colored band on top of it, so you can figure out who they are. And then if we look back there one more time, Gary, you can see the paddle wheel that would power this ship. It's largely encased behind 2.5 inches of armor, which will be on the outside of the ship, and we'll show you that armor here in a second. Some of it still exists. And that paddle wheel will give us a top cruising speed of 6 knots, which is just over 6 miles an hour. Going down river, it's about 3 knots of pressure coming down the Mississippi. That's usually the average speed of the Mississippi up in this area in the 1860s. But if it's raining upriver, remember this is a big drainage system. Anything that happens upriver will affect the downriver, and so the river sometimes will be higher, it will be lower, and it will be much more faster river. If you try to turn this thing around, You're going to start making your way back up the river. You might be able to make 2 knots, or about 2 miles an hour. So we're not talking about ships cruising at a fast pace. We're not talking about, fast carriers or the fast cruising battleships of the world wars. I mean, this is a slow moving vessel that plods along. Up here, just above where Gary's standing, is the pilot house. Tim, who's unfortunately not with us, he had to go shoot something else. He told us when this ship was raised in the 1960s, 1964, it was raised from the bottom of the river. They actually placed this on the docks down here in Vicksburg, and you could actually walk right into the pilot house because the ship came up in a few different pieces. Over on this side, and I'll bring on Kris Mackowski in a minute, I can see him ready to come on. You can see actually a large gash, or almost a canyon, between the bow section and the midsection of where we are. This damage was not done by Confederates. In fact, this was done when this ship was raised. It was found in 1956. It was located. But it takes 8 more years before we can bring it up off the bottom of the Yazoo. When they brought it up, they put steel cables around it. And this sat 36 feet below the river surface, and it was encased in mud. You'd think that would be a problem, but in fact, the mud acted as a shield from just about everything. So as they started to bring it up, though, if you ever think about putting your boot down into a mud puddle and then you go to pick it up and the boot tries to be sucked right off your foot because of that mud, that's what happens to this ship. The river doesn't want to give up its prey, and it's ripped into 3 different pieces. That line that you see here is one of the steel cables ripping right through the hull of this ship and right up through the lower deck and the main deck, or what was left of it, tearing it apart. But when it comes up, this is a museum in and of itself. Everything has to be cleaned up, but everything was on the ship, from cannons to watches to bottles, anything you could think of. And in fact, the Cairo Museum is home to one of the greatest underwater archaeological collections in the United States, because this was a true treasure trove.
Now, because the ship is on display outside, it's under an open air tent, so it provides lots of great access to it. But we can see over here, for instance, there's a bird's nest in the capstan, there's a bird's nest in parts of the front of the boat. Got a lot of open nature going on. It looks dusty. It's pollen season here in Mississippi, so that's why we've kind of got this coating of things.
It's also loud because they're keeping air moving underneath it, so if you hear a hum, that's not our microphones.
So, and it's a fascinating opportunity to come and walk around and explore what things were like. If we take a close look at parts of this ship, there are surprises everywhere. For instance, if we look at the steel armor on the outside here, those are railroad ties that they use to bend along the front as the ship kind of moves. That's a different sort of armor plating than they have over here on this side, where they've got big, long, straight plates. As Kris mentioned, they have the opportunity to open up some of these plates. We'll take a quick look at that. But I'm going to show Gary real quick up here. If we look in the pilot house, same sort of thing. These guys were sitting ducks up there with their big steering wheel, so you can see the windows. They could open and close those as necessary, because if you had Confederate skirmishers along the banks, they're taking pot shots at you. Gosh, if you can get the pilot, then this boat has no steerage. And so what they do is kind of open and close things as necessary. That's really important for ventilation, but imagine being in there with all those things closed and you're in the iron and it's hot and seething and steamy. The other
Seething and steaming. I love it.
The other thing that's really important to kind of pay attention to when you're on this ship is the frame that the Park Service built to help preserve the ship itself. So we've got these wonderful beams throughout that serve as a skeleton, a frame to hold together the remnants of the ship. It's a beautiful, beautifully done thing. But so for instance, if we look over here, they've used that framing to recreate what the smokestacks would have looked like, because those smokestacks didn't survive. But if we see up top those bands that Kris mentioned, they are there. We can see those. And so they really do a nice job of holding this together, evoking things, and helping us kind of see this ship in its fuller form. There we can see the large pistons that drove the paddle wheel, the steam coming from these boilers, pushing those pistons back and forth, churning the wheels so that they can move up and down. And they've got to be able to react quickly, because these things are operating in sometimes very narrow waterways. Not a lot of navigability, not a lot of maneuverability. So they're trying to make these things as adaptable and as versatile as possible for the sorts of settings that they're going to be fighting in. Kris, I know that you were going to mention some of the things about how these guys operate these guns and open up these windows and stuff. I didn't know if you wanted to point that out real quick while we were standing over there.
Yeah, while we're standing here, two corrections, one for me, 3 guns on the bow, 3 on the stern. Kris said steel, those are iron,
Oh, yeah.
over there, hence the name Ironclad. But you notice they are basically railroad ties, or I'm sorry, railroad rails. There's me trying to correct you, can't even speak. So we're over here, they look like basically rails. Over here on this side where Gary's standing, you can see the interlocking and overlapping iron plates. We'll see that from the other side here in a moment. But basically what they do is like putting together, if you're putting together a pre-made floor in your house where it's tongue and groove, it's exactly what they're doing here on this ship. So let's take a walk on the outside. These guns, you're probably going to ask, are the cannons original? Yes, you're looking at an 8-inch gun that went down with the ship in December of 1862. But this is a nice view over here.
I'm coming.
Oh, Gary's got one side, good. Showing that side, and then a nice view on this side to show you the iron plating. You can also see where one of the lifeboats would have been hoisted on the side of the ship or on the starboard side of the ship. And you'll start to make our way towards the rear.
And I think one of the things that's really important when you come out here and look at the ship is take a look at the details. As we look at the interlocking iron plates here, for instance, if you look at the way that the wood is put together to create interlocking layers to help strengthen the front of the ship. If you take a look at the nails that were created, they're 6-8 inches long as spikes. They're absolutely huge, bigger than my thumb, and driving them through to help hold these things in place. My favorite detail to look at as we examine the ship, can't see it from this side, but where the mine exploded, the timbers are singed. You can still see the fire that resulted from that explosion on those timbers. And so this ship really has a fascinating story to tell if you look closely. From out here, we can see those gray bands that Kris pointed out earlier. Each ship was color-coded, so when they're out moving around in the river, you can tell which one is which if you need to as you're trying to communicate. And here we can see kind of the open back of this boat. And look at see here you can see the length of some of these spikes that are holding things together. And some of these planks are like 3 inches thick. They've got a space between them and then another layer of wood, so that extra air in there adds to the buoyancy, adds to some of the extra protection. So just lots of innovative ways for them to try to help make this a functional warship in 100 days. That's what's fascinating to me. Pretty quick construct. So if we look in the back here, you can see they've got the flag, you've got the artillery pieces so that you can protect yourself from rear and front. You can engage in rear and front as well. I love the paddle wheel back here. When they brought that up, it was just like you'd taken a piece of newspaper and crinkled it up, and they had to uncrinkle it and smooth that whole thing out and get it back into ship shape, if you'll pardon the terrible, terrible pun there, so that they can then make it something that actually looks like it did once upon a time. And to me, this is just an engineering marvel that they were able to put this together as quickly as they did, as functionally as they did, and then sail off to war and rewrite the rules of warfare on the sea, around the water, as a result.
Yeah, and just to close up, you can see the 2 chase guns here on the stern, and you can see the rudders back here. So we have dual rudders that would be used to turn this ship. We're not going to turn this thing on a dime, but this is much more maneuverable for a river. You would not want to take this thing out in the high seas. Why do the Confederates place torpedoes in the water, which we would call mines today? It's simply because it's the soft underbelly of this ship. That's where it's most vulnerable, and that's how you're going to have to sink it. So you have to hit it where it's most vulnerable, and hitting it up on top is not the way to sink a ship like this. Hitting it from underneath is going to be the way to take down this ship, at least in the 1800s. A couple other real quick things. You know, across the paddle wheels of old ships that went up and down the Mississippi, there used to be a bridge across it because you couldn't go from one side of the paddle to the other because you had a wheel there. So that's where you sometimes get the term bridge coming from, is that bridge that goes across the paddle wheel. And then, of course, much of what you see here is structurally keeping it together, but you do have original pieces of the rudder, the ironwork, the guns themselves, parts of the decks, the hull of the ship down here. So there's a lot here to come out and see. There's a 175-foot boat with 175 men on it, so it's easy to remember that. Top speed of about 6 knots, and this was state-of-the-art for the Mississippi River, at least whenever it comes to a warship, in early 1862. So you would have seen 7 of these things produced going out there, and the Cairo was the first of the City series that was sunk by the Confederates. So it does not survive the war. Famed historian Ed Barse, as well as one of his friends, Warren, and another gentleman found this ship. It was a long search to find it. There's a whole nother backstory of getting this thing raised off the bottom and how they paid for it, and some backroom deals on getting some money for it and things that are probably for another time. But if you ever get out to Vicksburg National Military Park, check out the USS Cairo. You know, this came here in 1977 after it came back from the shipyards at Pascagoula. And this has been here since the 70s, and it's a fantastic museum to check out. You can get on the ship just like we did, and you can check out one of the true gems of any Civil War park, especially the National Park Service, USS Cairo. Gentlemen, anything to add?
No, just again, thank you for everything you do to allow us to come out here and explore these things and share them with you. It's a privilege for us to be in the field with each other and with you. So thank you for support for allowing us to do that. Click that like button, click that subscribe button, click that alert button. Make sure you share this with all your friends, and make sure that you help us continue to spread the gospel of battlefield preservation and education.